Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Saturday afternoon, Clemson wraps up their spring practice. We immediately got on after and kind of gave some instant takeaways and kind of some broad takeaways that we had from that Clemson spring game. 36 hours have passed. I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into what we saw from this Clemson program, talk about some questions that we certainly still have heading into 2024. But from my lens, there were a lot of questions that were answered for this Clemson program during that spring game as well. I want to dive into the film, talk about some players that really flashed for this Clemson program. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. A massive shout out to the Clemson fans, whether we're talking this program from spring practice on the recruiting trail. The amount of support y'all have shown the fellas truly does mean a lot. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, but much more importantly, would love to hear some more feedback in the comment section. We hopped on Saturday afternoon. A lot of you guys didn't necessarily agree with some of the takes. And I mean, that's what I appreciate about the sport of college football, the good discourse in the comment section. So would love to hear from you guys, whether you agree, whether you disagree. We'll chop it up there. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And I want to start with, kind of a thought that I've been playing around with over the last 24 hours about this Clemson program, and that is this eerily reminds me a lot of this Michigan program 12 months ago, how we talked about this Michigan team 12 months ago during spring practice. Many of you guys know I'm a massive Michigan fan. Very similar discourse coming out of this Clemson fan base that we had during this Michigan fan base 12 months ago, where we knew we would have an elite defense. But the question was, how good can this team be? Can this team compete for national championship? It's kind of in the backcourt of the offense. And again, we still have some question marks about the offense heading into 2024. We'll get into that in just a little bit. But you focus on this Clemson defense. And I think a lot of Clemson fans, whether you think Cade Klubnik's going to get this offense going, whether you think the Clemson offense is going to get going, period, or not, you'll look at this Clemson defense and say, this is going to be a top 5 unit in the country. That was my biggest takeaway. Now, going into some of the questions that we had about this Clemson program on the defensive side of the football, the one big question we had was, what is the edge rusher position going to look like for Clemson? You knew you had a dog in TJ Parker. Peter Wood's going to kick out to the edge in 2024. In my mind, that represents one of, if not the best edge rushing duo that you see in the country. But the conversation revolved around, for this team to be special on the defensive side of the football, you need some of that young talent to step up and add some depth to this unit. During that spring game, I didn't only think they stepped up and added some depth. These guys are going to be playmakers for Clemson in 2024. Guys like A.J. Hoffler, Jaheim Lawson, Zaire Patterson, they stepped up in a massive way. That was one of my biggest takeaways. Was the biggest question I had was, all right, who after TJ Parker and Peter Woods are going to be guys for Clemson? A laundry list of guys really emerged out of that spring game. And I'll say, just hand up, I am stupid for doubting Dabo Swinney in terms of developing guys on the defensive line. He's done it for the last decade. Don't know why I thought 2024 would be any different. My biggest takeaway is what you saw from some of those edge rushers on Saturday afternoon. Getting into a little bit of the film, I want to talk about Zaire Patterson first, a guy that, coming out of high school was one of my favorite prospects, a guy that the physical traits were absolutely dripping off of him. Not a ton of opportunity, not a ton of production from Patterson during his first couple of years for Clemson. He flashed during the spring game as a guy that I think Clemson can lean on in 2024. Working on the bottom of your screen here against the left tackle, you see what we loved out of him coming out of high school, and that is the raw power that he has in his hands. Getting his hands right into the chest of that left tackle, absolutely showing that physicality, closing in on the quarterback, forcing an early errant throw for an interception. And then you take a look at a guy like Jaheim Lawson, who I think is just an absolute sleeper heading into 2024. The twitch that he showed off the line of scrimmage, not only as a pass rusher, but also stopping the run, had that interception against the boundary. You're talking about a next level athlete for Clemson. And it's starting to get wild that Jaheim Lawson probably doesn't even start for Clemson on the defensive side of the football, but he's going to play a lot. You see the burst, you see the bend that Jaheim Lawson has coming off the line of scrimmage here, using his hands, running the arc, and getting to the quarterback. Dabo Swinney ended up blowing that one dead for a sack. Why does this remind me of this Michigan team from last year? Is what I think made Michigan's defensive line so special is, yes, you had some star talent, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, but more importantly, that Michigan defensive line was so deep. And you start talking about the goals that Michigan had that Clemson's going to have in 2024 in terms of, hey, we want to go win the ACC, make some noise in the college football playoffs. You got to be deep on the defensive line. Now you're starting to talk about guys like Cade Denhoff, who also had a phenomenal game, TJ Parker, Peter Woods, AJ Hoffler, Jaheim Lawson, Zaire Patterson. Was that 6 guys that we just named as absolute playmakers for this Clemson defense at that edge rusher position? You saw Peyton Page, you saw DeMonte Capar absolutely dominate as well. We don't have many questions about the inside of that Clemson defensive line. We had some at the edge rusher position, and I think those questions got answered for Clemson on Saturday. The last guy I just want to talk about, just include a little of one of my favorite prospects in the 2024 class. That's Sammy Brown. Now, Wade Wood has Barrett Carter. They're probably going to be your guys at the linebacker spot in 2024. Sammy Brown can get used in so many different ways, and that's what excites me the most about Sammy Brown is, yes, he's also probably not going to start for this Clemson team, which is kind of wild saying. Probably a guy that starts on most college football programs as a freshman. But because of the versatility that Sammy Brown has, you can get him involved in this Clemson defense. You roll the film here, kind of playing that overhang linebacker spot where he's going to creep up to the line of scrimmage, run this arc, and you talk about having an edge rusher presence as that linebacker spot. Look at this shoulder dip completely ghosting the offensive tackle, getting a K. Klubnik. That's probably a strip sack on live Saturday games. Sammy Brown's a guy that is going to play for this Clemson defense. And again, going back to that Michigan parallel, what made Michigan's defense so special in 2023, and in my mind at least, is that they had an elite defense of line, but they also paired that up with athletic difference makers at the linebacker spot in Junior Colson and Mikey Barrett. And when you have an elite defensive line and then you start having difference makers at that linebacker spot where you can get really creative in terms of how you use them, that's how you start creating turnovers. That's how you start winning football games on the defensive side of the football. That's what I think Clemson has. Now, getting into the conversation of the offensive side, that it wasn't necessarily the best performance from Clemson's offense, and you guys were probably right to be critical of me, probably defending K. Klubnik a little too much. You didn't see what you wanted to see. Again, I still believe that there's not a lot of quarterbacks that are going to look good against this Clemson defense, especially in a spring game where when you take a look at the defensive play calling, they weren't making it easy on the opposing offense. It's a vanilla offense going up against a defense that is really turning the heat up on an offense that's playing with different combinations of wide receivers and offensive linemen. I think there's still an explanation for why you didn't see this offense play very good football on Saturday during the spring game. That being said, there are still some things that I want to talk about that are probably some optimistic stuff heading into 2024. And again, during spring practice, that's what I really like to focus on is what happens if this team puts it together. It's really easy to be critical all spring practice long about stuff that you're not too optimistic about. During spring practice, this is the time period where you're looking at this program and saying, all right, if it all comes together, what does that look like? And the first guy I want to talk about is Brian Wesco. As a true freshman, thought he flashed some really good things, not only as a guy after the catch, but also a guy that could deal with physicality. I think the biggest question you had about Brian Wesco that you probably don't have as much with TJ Moore coming into the summer is how does Brian Wesco deal with the physicality at the college football level? This is a guy that certainly needs to put on some weight. Dabo Swinney even said it during the game. I thought Brian Wesco showed some nice physicality at the catch point. You take a look at this play, kind of running a little bit of a back shoulder fade to the end zone. One, how is Brian Wesco going to kind of deal with cornerbacks putting hands on him? One, very, very quick off the ball, nice release, and then tracking the football, dealing with the hand fighting and physicality at the college football level, and then making a contested catch. I think that is massive if you're a Clemson fan to see Brian Wesco kind of show that he's probably ready to contribute to this offense day one in 2024. Next rep I want to talk about, and this is something that, we've really banged the table for Clemson over the last couple of weeks is what can you do after the catch? This is a Clemson year. It's no secret what Coach Riley wants to do on offense. He wants to get the football to his playmakers and let them work after the catch. think the biggest critique you had with Clemson is with all the injuries that they had to deal with in 2023. I mean, there weren't a lot of wide receivers that were making things happen after the catch. Brian Wesco, that's what he thrives off of, right? One, creating separation, catching the ball in stride, and then get to work after the catch, the quick twitch, the ability to get upfield. And again, the flashes that you saw from Brian Wesco, I thought was really intriguing. I thought Antonio Williams played some really good football too as a guy that can operate after the catch. You didn't have Tyler Brown healthy. You didn't have Troy Stellato healthy. TJ Moore comes in the summer, and then Jake Bringenstool didn't play either. So this Clemson offense, not only a spring game that inherently doesn't favor the offense, was also a lot didn't have, I should say, a lot of their playmakers where you look at the Clemson defense, besides Peter Woods, for my money, I don't think Barrett Carter played either. I mean, a lot of their ones were playing a lot during that spring game. So, yes, do we still have questions about this Clemson offense? Yes. Does Cade Klubnik need to continue to go through his progressions and keep the ball out of harm's way? Absolutely. But you saw some flashes from Adam Randall. You saw a really good play from Antonio Williams and Brian Wesco, where I think this Clemson team, are we going into this season saying Clemson is going to have a top 20, top 10 offense in the country? Absolutely not. But if they can run the football with Phil Moffitt back healthy in the running back room, control the line of scrimmage, and then play smothering defense like we saw in that spring game, we just saw a Michigan team that, again, lacked explosiveness on the offensive side of the football, but dominated the line of scrimmage, dominated time of possession. They just won a national championship. They beat out teams like Oregon and Washington with those elite, flashy offenses. There's an avenue for this Clemson team to really be a team that's difficult for teams to deal with because of what they can do along the line of scrimmage and on the defensive side of the football in this era of college football, with so many programs so heavily leaning on the recruiting trail and how they're building their roster to getting all this flashy skill on the offensive side of the football. I think you saw Michigan last year kind of use that shift and say, hey, we're going to go and control the line of scrimmage, play really good defense. There were not a lot of teams across the country that were constructed to deal with that Michigan team. And I think Clemson can kind of exploit a very similar thing where, yes, this Clemson offense is not going to average 45 points a game. I'm not going to get up here and tell you guys that. But I think this defense can force a lot of 3-and-outs, force a lot of turnovers. And if we just see marginal progressions and taking care of the football on the offensive side, this is a Clemson team that's going to be a hard out for any team across the country. We say it all the time. They lost 4 games last year. A lot of those games came down to turnovers and a few plays on the offensive side of the football that cost you some games, specifically in the red zone. If you just take some marginal jumps in terms of turnovers and finishing in the red zone, that's a team that at the very least was 10-2 last year, probably 11-1. So if you're a Clemson fan, yes, the offense, maybe not as much as you wanted to see during that spring game. There's an avenue for this Clemson team to be extremely dangerous in 2024. Really excited. Again, we'll talk about this storyline throughout the summer into the fall. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.